The NBA trade market is really beginning to heat up. We're getting to that time of the year where we're getting these rumors, Zach LaVine, maybe Donovan Mitchell, maybe a handful of other guys. And now this is officially trade season because coming up, things are changing within the NBA that are going to allow for not only a lot more trades, but for trades to be that much easier. Now, what I'm talking about as we get into trade season is there are a ton of guys around the league that are suddenly going to be eligible to be traded, that signed new contracts in the offseason. Draymond Green, D'Angelo Russell, any of these guys that sign new deals are not eligible to be traded until a couple months after that period. And in this case, it's the middle of December. It's December 15th. And the reason that that's important isn't necessarily because of the players themselves that are being eligible to be traded, because most of the bigger names have been eligible to be traded this entire time. But it's a critical piece of information and a critical point to get to because it's really uncommon for teams to make trades prior to this December point once the season starts, because it's really difficult to match contracts and match salaries when for some of these teams, half their roster has been ineligible to be traded until this December 15th date that we're getting to. And to me, every year, this always begins trade season. This is always the start of, okay, we have a decent understanding of how good each of these teams are, of what direction the teams are going to be going in. We've had some injuries. Everybody kind of has a real opportunity to have evaluated their team over the first 20 to 25 games of the year. And then all these players are suddenly eligible to be traded, and it makes things that much easier to maneuver. And there's a couple of teams to really spotlight that could definitely open things up. And first and foremost is, of course, the LA Lakers. I feel like this is a thing for them every single season. They're always active in the offseason. They brought in a ton of guys via free agency this past offseason. They re-signed plenty of players as well, guys that are now going to be eligible to be traded. And we've talked about this for the Lakers from the time that they brought these guys back. Guys like D'Angelo Russell, even all the way down to like the Christian Woods of the world, Gabe Vincent, these guys. There's a ton of salary now for the Lakers, certainly up to a max salary slot that is now eligible to be moved in a trade and be able to match salaries, and is a thing that we have talked about from the moment that these guys sign in the offseason, that the Lakers have been putting together contracts that make sense in a star trade scenario with some guys that we're going to talk about later in the video, and none of those players could have been traded until this December 15th date that is coming up. Now, the weird thing for the Lakers is that D'Angelo Russell is like the main piece. Every single time you see a Lakers trade, D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, these guys' salaries are involved. D'Lo's been good. Like, I don't know if you can count on him for the whole year. There's still definitely some warts there, but as a perimeter creator, as a shooter, like, he has been really good for this team to begin the year. And so it's weird to think about the possibility of shaking up your roster so much, but that's the way things work with LeBron teams. Like, you can be playing well, but if he sees an opportunity to improve the roster and increase his chances of winning another title, he's always going to push for that, especially now that he's so old and he only really has a couple more seasons left, you would imagine, of somewhat peak performance at the NBA level. And so the Lakers are definitely going to be a team to keep an eye on. Like, for example, if they wanted to go out and try and get Zach LaVine or maybe Donovan Mitchell during the year, any variety of players, they need these salaries. They need these guys that become eligible to be traded on December 15th. And that's why this is such a big deal. And like I mentioned earlier, it's why we don't typically see a lot of trades between October and December, because it's just difficult to make those kinds of moves when you're waiting on these guys to be eligible to be traded. And we are going to talk about other teams here throughout the video, but the Lakers, if I had to rank it, are definitely the number one team that I'm keeping an eye on, because it's not just D'Lo, it's guys like Jackson Hayes, Gabe Vincent. Like, there's a lot of salary there that could be moved. Related to the Lakers, Dallas is another team that I'm always keeping an eye on with them. They have Kyrie there. Kyrie's another one of these guys that was not eligible to be traded until December 15th. Dallas got off to a really good start to begin the year. They've been a little bit more uneven since. Kyrie has not been particularly great. He's had a couple of actually really terrible performances with Dallas. And right now, feels like the vibes are fine. But this feels like a situation where the Lakers, LeBron, could easily start putting out some feelers of Kyrie's interest in going to the Lakers. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but this scenario where maybe the Kyrie thing doesn't go perfectly over the first 20, 25 games, and you have all these salaries come available, and you have the opportunity to trade D'Lo and some stuff in exchange for Kyrie. This is a situation that, whether it happens or not, the Lakers were prepared for and were always anticipating. And Kyrie being one of those December 15th guys makes him another player to keep an eye on there in Dallas as it relates to LA. There's a couple of other teams as well. For example, Milwaukee seems like a team that needs to make some kind of move. They need to shake things up in some way. Obviously, they made a massive move in the offseason by bringing in Damian Lillard, but their defense is a real problem right now. And as you look forward to them in a postseason series against a team like Boston, for example, them having to deal with big, skilled wings is going to continue to be a problem for them. And so, for example, Malik Beasley, Jay Crowder, guys that they are having kind of try to be those big wing defenders for them, those guys are eligible to be traded. They're not huge contracts, but if they did did want to try and put a couple of pieces together here to try and fix those spots on the wing, there's really no point in keeping those guys around as well. So that's another team in Milwaukee that, as a part of this conversation with December 15th, as well as just how their season has started, especially defensively, I'm expecting them to be pretty active in terms of perimeter wings, especially on the defensive end of the floor. Another team as well that continues to get brought up with this is Phoenix. It's kind of like the Lakers thing in terms of how many players they brought in this past offseason. Like half the Suns roster is ineligible to be traded as of the recording of this video, but will be eligible once we get to December 15th. And a lot of them are, pretty small salaries. They were guys, on the edges that they were trying to find a couple of decent role players to help them. And like Phoenix feels like a team that obviously they've had issues with health, but it feels like a team that definitely would make a move. They're already so all in with this roster that packaging together, just a couple of assets here, a couple of contracts, and trying to make something work, I think makes a lot of sense. And again, they're just a really great example of why this December 15th, range is so important, because even if right now, as of the recording of this video, there was a deal that they really liked, it would be basically impossible for them to figure out a way to match salaries without using all of these guys that they just signed this offseason. So that December 15th date is really important for them. And then kind of in a similar vein to what we talked about with Milwaukee earlier, I'm keeping a very close eye on what's happening in Cleveland as we get closer to December 15th, as well as the trade deadline, because they also had a perimeter wing issue, but it wasn't defensive. Like, yeah, you'd like to have two-way wings, but they had guys that could guard and had guys that could score a little bit on the wing, but they needed both. They went out, got George Niang, they went out, got Max Strus, and the vibes in Cleveland are just not very good. I think there's definitely this cloud hanging over them as it relates to Donovan Mitchell and his future in Cleveland, as well as the fact that they can't get him and Garland to play particularly well together. Their offense in general is not great. Their defense is slipping. Like, things aren't good in Cleveland. And if they wanted to do one of two things, either make one more move to really try and make this work, I think the Strus and the Niang contracts are things that they could certainly try and use. Once we get to the 15th, more likely it's Niang, because Strus they've invested more heavily in. So it'd be weird to immediately just flip that and turn that around. One of those two guys, I think their salaries would make sense, but also as it relates to Cleveland, whether it be the Lakers, whether it be a variety of teams that suddenly have guys that they can trade and match salaries with, Donovan Mitchell is going to be a player to keep an eye on no matter what in Cleveland. There are some crazy scenarios and possibilities here with like a Klay Thompson, Donovan Mitchell swap in Golden State, New York, Miami, LA. All this stuff is on the table and possible. And obviously it matters in terms of what Cleveland wants to do with their own roster to try and improve it. But also, if it does get to the point where things are untenable and they do want to try and move on, this December 15th date makes that easier in terms of being able to match salaries around the league. So what I would say, if you're a fan of any of these teams that feels like maybe they're in the mix for a trade, is that it becomes much more likely here in a handful of days for that to happen because of the way that the salary structures work at the NBA level. And then, of course, from that 15th date on, we've got like 2 months basically where teams can make trades as we get closer to that February trade deadline. And this, the bottom line is, NBA trade season is officially starting.